In this demo, we are going to provision a new Cosmos DB Gremlin API instance. After that, I'm going to use a small .NET Core console application to create a graph in this empty database. Okay, first let's go ahead and provision an Azure Cosmos DB Gremlin API. Click on Azure Cosmos DB and click on Add. I am going to create a new resource group for this demo. So click on Create New and let's name it Gremlin Demo RG01. Okay, and let's put in an account name as well. So Reza Gremlin 01. And for the API, make sure you're choosing Gremlin or Graph. For the location, I am going to put my instance in East US, and we are going to leave geo redundancy and multi-region rights as disabled. Click on Network, Tags, Review plus Create, and clicking on Create. And let's wait for our Cosmos DB Gremlin API to get provisioned. After about 8 minutes, my Cosmos DB instance is ready. Let's take a look. Clicking on Go to Resource, and I am in the dashboard of my Cosmos DB Gremlin API. So now let's take a look at Data Explorer. And as you can see, the Data Explorer experience I get with my Gremlin API is almost identical to the other APIs. The only difference here is the fact that I'm seeing graphs instead of tables or collections. Let's go ahead and create a new graph here. Clicking on New Graph, and I need to define a database first. Since I don't have any existing database, let's go ahead and create a new one. I'll name my database GraphDB01, and I will leave 400 RUs as my database throughput. This is more than enough for the purpose of this demo. Let's scroll down and let's create my first graph. And as you remember, graph is the specialized entity for containers for this API. So I am going to name this graph my graph01, and I need to choose a partition key for this graph. This should be a property which is common between our vertices. So I am going to choose city, and let's click on OK. So now I have my new graph created. I can click on it, and as you can see, the graph is empty now. So next, we are going to use a small .NET Core application to populate this graph. I am in Visual Studio. I have created a small .NET Core console application. You can download the code for this application from the course files. So in this code, I am going to create a Gremlin client object, and using that object, we are going to populate our graph. So before running the application, we need to populate the hostname, port, the security key, the database, and the graph name. Let's go back to the Azure portal and quickly grab these values. So the first value I'm going to grab is the Gremlin endpoint. Let's grab that, go back to Visual Studio and paste it in. I'm going to pass the port number separately, so let's remove it from the URL. And same goes with the starting protocol. We don't need that here. We are using SSL, so the port number will be 443. And I'm going to grab the first primary key for my Cosmos DB. And let's paste it in. And as you remember, my database name was GraphDB01 and my graph name was my Graph01. Now let's put a breakpoint and run the application. Hopefully we can connect to Cosmos DB Gremlin API. So let's run that. Step in. And in this step, I am creating a Gremlin client object by passing the Gremlin server object we just created. And looks like it worked. So in the next step, I am creating a list of a few Gremlin queries, and we are going to run these queries against Cosmos DB. The first query is going to clean up all the objects within the graph, and the second query is going to create the first vertex. So for the ID of the vertex, I'm choosing Reza, all lowercase, and I can add some properties to it. I'm adding the first name property with the value of Reza, the email property with the value of reza@test.com, and of course the city property with the value of Toronto. And as you remember, the city is also my partition key, so it is mandatory to pass. I have commented out the rest of the commands, so let's go ahead and make sure we can run these two commands first. So step in, we populated the list, and now in the loop, I'm going to run these commands. So running the first one didn't return anything because we were simply cleaning up the graph. Let's go for the second command, and as you can see, this command is supposed to create my first vertex. So let's run it. And as you can see, I get a result back. And I'm printing the content of the result into the console. So let's put a breakpoint and continue. So if I take a look at the console, you can see the object which is created. and this object has a type of vertex. So now that we are sure we can run commands against Cosmos DB Gremlin API, let's stop the application and uncomment the rest of the commands. So in the next command, I am creating the second vertex in my graph. The ID is John. I have added the property of first name and also the property of email. So let's go ahead and run this code again. Each time I'm running this code, I am cleaning up the graph. So this time I am going to remove the breakpoints and run this code. This code is going to throw an exception. So let's go and see why. So running the code, and as you can see, I've got an exception, and this exception is happening for the John vertex. So let's copy the details, open Notepad and paste the details in, and as you can see, I get the error cannot add a vertex where the partition key property has value null. And this is because I have chosen the city as the partition key, but I haven't passed any city property for John. So let's stop this and fix it. So I am going to simply add a new property for John. The name of the property is city, and for the value, I'm going to put Boston. And let's go ahead and run this code again, and this time both nodes are created. In the next command, I am going to add an edge to my graph. I am introducing a new relation between Reza and John. Basically, John knows Reza. And in the next step, I am going to add a new vertex to my graph. The vertex type is a cell phone, and I'm going to add the property of ID with the value of Android phone, the property of operating system with the value of Android, the property of manufacturer with the value of LG, and finally the property of city with the value of Toronto. Probably adding the city property to a cell phone would be strange, but as you remember, adding the partition key is mandatory for all the vertices. And finally, I am adding the last edge. So I am saying Reza is using the Android phone. And as you can see, the Android phone is the ID of the vertex I just added. So let's go ahead and run this code. And looks like everything went well. So now let's go back to Azure Portal and take a look at our graph. So let's refresh. And I'm going to make more room here. Click on my graph. And I'm going to run the default Gremlin query. Let's run that. Looks like we need more room here. And let's zoom in. So as you can see, I get a visual of my graph. John knows Reza, and Reza is using an Android phone. So if I click on any of these vertices, I can see the details on the right hand side. So I can scroll down and I can see that John knows Reza. If I click on the Android phone, the details on the right hand side changes. So as you saw, by running a code, we have populated our graph. Now let's go ahead and run some queries on this graph.